And we all know you're attached at the hip to LeBron James. So when you say something about something that directly impacts LeBron James, that is going to be the assumption, whether fair or unfair. And Rich Paul is entirely too smart not to know that. Austin Reeves is a teammate of LeBron James who has ascended and is averaging 26 a game.
LeBron James moved fast to create space between himself and Rich Paul after those Austin Reeves trade comments hit the airwaves. No hesitation, no pause. LeBron jumped out front saying Rich is his own man, and whatever Rich says does not reflect how he personally feels.
And then Rich Paul comes out and says that and brings up somebody's name like Jaren Jackson. From a basketball standpoint, one could argue it makes sense, but the point is, saying something like that, Austin Reeves would be gone. That would benefit LeBron James, who'd have the ball in his hands even more, and we're supposed to ignore that?
He doubled down hard, telling people to believe him and treat the whole thing like background noise. But Stephen A. Smith wasn't falling for that at all. On First Take, he flat out called it a performance. He pointed to LeBron's long track record of using media moments to softly test roster ideas while keeping his fingerprints clean. So the real question isn't simple. Is Stephen A. reaching, or is he saying what everyone already knows but doesn't want to say out loud?
LeBron James agent Rich Paul made headlines earlier this week when he suggested on his podcast that the Lakers trade Austin Reeves for Grizzlies All-Star Jaren Jackson Jr. But after last night's Lakers win, LeBron tried to distance himself from his agent's comments. James told ESPN in his way out of Crypto.com Arena this, quote, "I think you all know by now, Rich is his own man, and what Rich says is not a direct reflection of me and how I feel. And I hope people know that. I hope people know that. And if they're not sensible to know that, then I don't know what to tell them."
This whole thing exploded when Rich Paul went on his podcast and casually floated the idea that the Los Angeles Lakers should trade Austin Reeves to the Memphis Grizzlies for Jaren Jackson Jr. That suggestion didn't land quietly. It hit like a shockwave. Lakers fans instantly lost their minds. Timelines went nuclear, and the backlash was loud, chaotic, and non-stop.
The Lakers, I would probably be targeting the Memphis Grizzlies as a trade partner for Jaren Jackson.
Yeah, that'd be a great fit.
I would.
For whom?
Well, that's the thing, because you got to figure out the package. There's a world where you can do what's best for your team and do what's best for Austin, because Austin deserves to get paid.
Then things got even messier. Reports started swirling that Reeves' agent Reggie Berry flew across the country just to confront Rich Paul at a Lakers game. That's not casual business. That's emergency level damage control. That's when it became clear this wasn't just podcast chatter anymore. At that point, LeBron knew the situation was spiraling. Cameras caught him leaving Crypto.com Arena, where he stopped to speak with ESPN and tried to shut the whole thing down in real time. He said, Rich is his own man. He said what Rich says is not a direct reflection of how he feels. He added, I hope people know that.
Flip side to it, however, is that there's also a history with LeBron James directly or indirectly influencing team moves and using media, podcasts, and other forms of media to do it. That's a fact. And when that's the reality, you gotta know, if you're Rich Paul, and when you open your mouth, the assumption is, oh, this is something that LeBron James is feeling. Rich Paul is speaking for.
Then came the line that turned heads. If they're not sensible enough to know that, I don't know what to tell them. That last part mattered. LeBron wasn't just defending himself, he was subtly flipping the blame back onto fans and media, basically saying the dots people were connecting were irrational. That's classic deflection energy. Shift the focus away from the pattern and make the audience sound unreasonable for noticing it. When Stephen A. Smith was asked whether he believed LeBron's explanation, his response cut straight through the smoke. He started with respect, saying he knows Rich Paul personally and giving him credit for building a powerful agency from the ground up.
Point is that when you think about Rich Paul and his ascension, give respect and deference where he's due. He's a good brother, he's doing great things, and he's gonna continue to do great things. But he has to accept something, okay? You have a podcast now as an agent. Now you ain't some rookie that just arrived, Swagoo. You've been in this game a while. I'm talking about Rich Paul. You've made deals. You've influenced deals being made. You've been accused of influencing deals that have been made. And we all know you're attached at the hip to LeBron James.
No hate there. Respect where it's earned. But then Stephen A. leaned in. He reminded everyone that Rich Paul's rise didn't happen in isolation. This wasn't some random agent speaking into the void. And when Rich talks about roster moves, especially involving LeBron's team, it's never accidental. It's never just noise. That's where LeBron's defense started to crack.
Not enough who commented on what you said actually watched the clip, even the full clip.
Right. Including my man Reg, who happens to be Austin's agent. We talked, just my guy. I mean, I've known him for 20 years.
Stephen A. framed it as a familiar pattern. Media idea gets floated. Public reaction gets measured. And LeBron stays clean if it goes sideways. According to him, this wasn't chaos. It was calculated distance. Now look at how fast LeBron backpedaled. 1 minute, there's silence. The next minute, he's stressing that he had nothing to do with it. Creating space between himself and his closest business partner like that isn't normal behavior. It's reactionary. And let's not ignore the timing. The confrontation report drops. Fans are heated. Then suddenly LeBron is out here correcting the narrative on camera. That doesn't feel random. That feels like containment. So what's really going on here? Is Stephen A. Smith exposing a pattern everyone quietly recognizes? Or is this all being read way too deep over a podcast comment that went left? Say it with your chest in the comments. No filters, no tiptoeing, because whether people like it or not, this situation put a spotlight on how power, media, and influence actually move behind the scenes in the NBA. And if this breakdown is already hitting, make sure you subscribe, because this story doesn't stop here, and what comes next is about to get even louder. He's not just defending himself anymore. He's framing disbelief as ignorance. The message is basically, if you don't buy this, you're not smart enough to understand it. That tone is loud, and people caught it instantly. When Stephen A. Smith was asked if he believed any of that, his response sliced straight through the defense like it wasn't even there. Stephen A. started with respect. He said he knows Rich Paul personally and gave him credit for building a serious empire as an agent. No hate, no cheap shots. Credit where it's earned. But respect doesn't cancel reality. Then he got to the real point. Rich Paul's rise didn't happen in isolation. Moves like this don't come out of thin air. When something this specific hits the public, it's usually connected to something bigger. Stephen A. even said, he's a good brother. He's doing great things and he'll keep doing great things. But then he dropped the hammer, because praise doesn't erase responsibility. Rich Paul isn't new to this game. He's not some rookie agent learning on the fly. He's been around for years, closing major deals, shaping decisions, influencing outcomes, and now he's got a podcast that people actually listen to. When you speak publicly with that level of power, your words don't float in a vacuum. Stephen A. made it crystal clear. You don't get to talk like a media personality when your job directly affects careers, locker rooms, and franchises. That's where the tone shifted. Then came the point nobody wanted to say out loud. Rich Paul is attached at the hip to LeBron James. That's not an insult. That's reality. His power comes from representing LeBron. His credibility comes from being LeBron's closest confidant. His influence exists because of that relationship. You can't leverage that connection for status, access, and authority. Then turn around and say, this has nothing to do with LeBron when things get uncomfortable. That's the contradiction Stephen A. exposed. He said, when Rich Paul speaks on anything that directly impacts LeBron, a teammate, a roster move, a title push, people will always connect it back to LeBron. Fair or unfair, that's how this works. And Rich Paul is way too smart not to know that. That's exactly where LeBron's defense starts collapsing. Rich Paul isn't clueless. He's one of the most successful agents in basketball history. He understands optics. He understands timing. He understands consequences. So either Rich Paul suddenly forgot how influence works out in which nobody believes, or he knew exactly what would happen when he suggested trading Austin Reeves. And if he knew it would be tied to LeBron, then LeBron either knew beforehand or quietly agrees with the idea. Stephen A. didn't stop there. He broke down the basketball context, and it made the situation look even more calculated. Reeves isn't just some random role player. He's wearing purple and gold, stepping up when it matters, and putting real pressure on defenses. Then you add this part. LeBron picked up his player option on Petrovic to over $52 million. No long-term commitment, no future guarantees. A lot of people see this as his final run in LA. So if you're all in, If you're chasing one last push, if you're trying to maximize right now, the motive becomes obvious. One last real championship shot. There's no patience in that mindset, no long-term planning. It's about now. Reeves has been hooping, no debate. When healthy, he's scoring, creating, and carrying more responsibility. But here's the tension point. He's also due for a big contract extension, and that money tightens flexibility fast. From a short-term LeBron lens, flipping Reeves for a defensive anchor like Jaren Jackson Jr. suddenly looks strategic, not emotional. Stephen A. broke it down clean. Look at the West. Are the Lakers beating the Denver Nuggets? Probably not. Are they beating the Oklahoma City Thunder? Doubtful. Are they guaranteed against the San Antonio Spurs? Not even that. So what's the move? How do you close the gap? Then Rich Paul casually throws Jaren Jackson Jr.'s name out on a podcast, and we're supposed to act like it's nothing. Come on. From a pure basketball angle, someone could argue it makes sense, but saying it out loud changes everything. The moment that suggestion drops, Austin Reeves' name is basically packed already. And let's be honest about who benefits. Reeves gone means fewer touches competing for control. LeBron handles the ball even more. A defensive anchor comes in to cover LeBron's defensive decline. Cap flexibility stays aligned with LeBron's timeline. That's why the denial sounds shaky. The trade benefits LeBron James in every possible way. It removes a rising ball-dominant teammate and replaces him with a piece that masks weaknesses. Stephen A. even acknowledged the technical truth. LeBron might not be lying. Rich Paul can be his own man. He can have his own thoughts and opinions. Respect that, but then comes the reality check. There's a long documented history of LeBron James influencing roster moves directly or indirectly, through CCU, through interviews, podcasts, and media narratives, floating ideas without officially owning them. And that's the part nobody can ignore anymore. That's the part nobody can ignore. And that's exactly why this whole situation doesn't pass the smell test. This isn't opinion anymore. This is history. LeBron James has spent his entire career influencing roster decisions through back channels, pressure points, and media messaging. Cleveland, Miami, back to Cleveland, and now Los Angeles. Different cities, same blueprint. The pattern never changes, only the uniforms do. So when LeBron's best friend and agent publicly suggests a trade that clearly benefits LeBron, people are going to connect the dots. Not because they're reaching, because history backs it up every single time. That's exactly what Stephen A. Smith was getting at. He made it clear. This isn't personal. This is reality. The moment Rich Paul opens his mouth, the assumption becomes, oh, this is how LeBron feels. That's not speculation. That's logic. Stephen A. even spelled it out. He said flat out he's not accusing Rich Paul of lying. He said, I know Rich Paul well enough to know he speaks for himself. Respect given. But then came the truth that actually matters. He also knows how deeply Rich is tied to LeBron, how loyal he is, how he rides for LeBron every single day. And that attachment is the real issue. Loyalty is great in friendship. Ride or die sounds noble, but it becomes a problem when you're also acting like a media voice, casually floating roster moves that affect your best friend's legacy. At that point, you can't separate those roles. You just can't. They're too intertwined. Stephen A. drove that home hard. He said LeBron might actually be telling the truth. Rich Paul could have spoken independently, but here's the reality. Almost nobody believes Rich Paul would say something like this without LeBron knowing about it, discussing it, or at least sharing the same feeling. That belief doesn't fly in the real world, not with this history. Then Stephen A.'s co-host dropped the perfect analogy. He said when people live in the same house and someone from that house starts talking about changing the house, everyone assumes the house talked about it first. That's common sense. That's how people think. And that's why this situation keeps falling apart the more you look at it. This isn't guilt by association. In this case, it's reasonable. The relationship makes the assumption logical. When your best friend, who also happens to be your agent, who also represents multiple Lakers players, suggests trading a teammate, nobody is crazy for assuming you're involved. That's not bias. That's logic built on proximity and history. Then Marcus Spears jumped in and made it look even more suspicious by laying out the basketball side. Look at where LeBron is in his career. Look at what JJ Redick has been publicly saying all season. Redick has repeatedly called out the Lakers' defensive problems, and the numbers back it up. The Lakers are near the bottom of the league in opponent three-point percentage. They struggle guarding the perimeter. That's not opinion, that's data. So what do they need? Defensive help, big time. Now look at Jaren Jackson Jr., former Defensive Player of the Year, elite rim protector, a player who directly fixes the exact weakness the coaching staff has been talking about all year. So Rich Paul's suggestion just happens to line up perfectly with the Lakers' biggest issue. It matches the coaching complaints, the analytics, and what would extend LeBron's championship window. And we're supposed to believe LeBron had nothing to do with that idea. Please. Stephen A. then brought up an even more uncomfortable angle. He said there are people around the league, especially in agent circles, who believe agents like Rich Paul shouldn't even have podcasts. Why? Because someone with that much power, like someone negotiating deals and influencing rosters, shouldn't also have a public platform casually discussing those same decisions. Stephen A. pointed out similar concerns existed when LeBron launched his own podcast. People worried powerful voices were using media to steer outcomes without accountability. That situation eventually ended with Darvin Ham being out and JJ Redick being hired. Nobody talks about it now because Redick delivered results. But the concern was real then, and it's real now. When power, media influence, and decision-making mix, lines get blurry fast. That's why this situation keeps raising eyebrows. The core issue with Rich Paul having a podcast is simple. He cannot separate being LeBron's agent from being a media voice. Everything he says gets filtered through his relationship with LeBron James, especially when he's talking about roster moves involving LeBron's own team. The assumption will always be that he's speaking for LeBron or with LeBron's knowledge, and that assumption isn't crazy, it's logical. LeBron's defense asks people to ignore context, ignore history, ignore how perfectly the move benefits him. That's not reasonable. That's asking people to play dumb. Stephen A. Smith called that out perfectly. He even gave LeBron the technical benefit of the doubt. He said LeBron might be telling the truth in the narrowest sense, but he made one thing crystal clear. Almost nobody is going to believe it. Why? Because the circumstances make that belief unrealistic. And that leads to the bigger issue. LeBron's long-running pattern of using proxies throughout his career. People close to him float ideas, shape narratives, apply pressure indirectly. When it works, great. When it blows up, LeBron steps back and claims zero involvement. That playbook isn't new. It's so established that even some supporters quietly acknowledge it. What Stephen A. did on First Take was expose that playbook without calling LeBron a liar. He stayed precise. He stayed factual. He said technically LeBron could be telling the truth, but practically the story doesn't hold up. The history doesn't support it. The relationship doesn't support it. The basketball logic doesn't support it. And that's why people keep connecting the dots. Stephen A. didn't exaggerate. He didn't reach. He just laid it all out and let the pattern speak for itself. If you think Stephen A. nailed it, hit that like button. If you still believe LeBron's version, smash subscribe and say it with your chest in the comments. Either way, share this video because this Lakers situation isn't cooling off anytime soon.